All right, so we're now into spring, the season where we typically see activity on the real estate market pick up as sellers try to capitalize on the warmer weather, greener grass, and beautiful blossoming flowers. But what does that mean for property prices over the next 3 months? Will they continue to surge higher, having already risen more than 5% in the last 12 months? Or will the higher volume of listings put a dampener on prices by allowing supply to meet demand? Well, joining us to discuss that and more is REA Group Senior Economist Eleanor Creagh. G'day, Eleanor. Welcome to the Savings Tip Jar.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Thanks for agreeing to be with us too again, Eleanor. You were last on in episode 78, I believe, which is around this time last year. It's now episode 122, and safe to say there's a lot that's gone on over the past year. But as always, it seems like the house always wins. But before we get into all that good stuff, do you have a savings tip for us?
Yeah, no, this is an interesting one. So, amongst my friends, I'm always getting asked for saving tips, as the trusty economist in the friendship group. And I think one of the best savings tips that I have is just being pretty stringent with setting aside a portion of your salary or earnings or whatever it is, however you make your money, and making sure that without a doubt, without fail, whatever else you have going on that month, whatever else you're saving for, that you continue to put that portion into an investing bucket. Now, I usually use an app called Raise, which has been pretty good for me over the past, I think it's pretty much since inception that I've had that account. I want to say 6 or 7 years.
Nice.
And I've just been very diligent with every month putting the same proportion of my earnings into that account. And it's been great in terms of, accumulating a long-term investment and savings jar.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I really love that one because I actually was a big user of Raise as well, and it really helped me accelerate sort of my savings towards my eventual housing deposit. So definitely helped me along that journey. And it is kind of funny what you said earlier regarding, being the economist, friends will often ask you. We can all sort of relate to that because whenever people find out that we work in finance, it's immediately free reign to ask us about every single finance thing. So Harrison always getting asked by Uber drivers, about novated leasing.
Yeah, novated leases.
Yeah.
Yeah, disclaimer, this is not personal advice.
Yes.
Good
That's
disclaimer.
what we always have to say. Yeah, please don't sue us if you make a mistake. Okay, so the spring selling season as well and truly kicked off. Just wanted to know, though, just generally, do we typically see property price rises accelerate in spring? Or, I was actually thinking, well, maybe if listings are up, that could actually decelerate prices. So what's your experience?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. When it comes to home price growth, there are a lot of factors that impact home price growth, namely interest rates, and of course the supply of stock on market. So actually whether we see home price growth accelerate in spring often depends on that demand-supply balance. Now, this year we're looking at a pretty busy spring selling season ahead. We've had 3 RBA rate cuts delivered so far already. And those interest rate cuts are restoring buyers' borrowing capacities, buyer confidence, and we're already seeing a more synchronized upturn in home prices around the country. So demand has reaccelerated in Sydney and Melbourne after a softer patch, while those outperformers of recent years, Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane, are still seeing prices growing at a pretty brisk pace. It is normalizing after the exceptional growth of recent years. But we are seeing, that demand is looking to increase into the spring selling season. Already the pace of home price growth is accelerating in markets that have been lagging. And at the same time, the supply of stock for sale is pretty constrained relative to last year. So if that condition continues to hold throughout this year's spring selling season, it's likely that we will see housing markets around the country kind of poised for another leg higher in terms of home price growth.
Yeah, for sure, Eleanor. Now, at the start of the year, I moved from Brisbane to Melbourne, and I managed to buy a property in Melbourne in the dead of winter. And I noticed that the sort of winter slowdown. Thank you. I noticed the winter slowdown is particularly pronounced in the sort of southern states. If it's raining, people don't want to look at properties. They don't want to bid at auction. And I really found the lack of listings pretty apparent, more so than Brisbane. To what effect do you think this has on the housing market coming into spring? Because there's all this talk about spring selling season being a great time to sell, but could it be a good time to buy instead with the uptick in listings?
Certainly, we do see that throughout the spring selling season, typically more stock hits the market. That is good news for home buyers because it means more choice. And at the same time, on the flip side, for those on the other side of the fence looking to sell their home, it also means that there's more buyers out there in the market. So I guess a greater potential of selling that home. And certainly this year, we're seeing that when we look across the country and we look at various demand metrics on realestate.com.au, so looking at inquiry per listing on realestate.com.au, we can see some quite interesting regional variances and also some signals there that we're probably gearing up for a pretty busy spring selling season. So at the national level, that buyer inquiry per listing is at a 3-year high. We're also seeing that search activity on the platform is at its highest since late 2021. Now, when we break down some of those regional differences in inquiry per listing on realestate.com.au, Darwin, Hobart and Melbourne have already seen very widespread increases in buyer demand across almost all suburbs. So Melbourne, it looks like buyers are certainly flocking back after what has been really kind of 4 or 5 years of underperformance for Melbourne's housing market. So more than 90% of suburbs in Melbourne are seeing an increase in that buyer inquiry per listing metric at the moment.
It certainly seems, Eleanor, as a lot of people are expecting property price rises to continue or even accelerate over the next year or so, particularly on the back of those interest rate cuts. But also, one thing that really sort of got tongues wagging was the expansion of the home guarantee scheme, which has been brought forward to October. A lot of people, because it essentially allows all first home buyers, no matter what their income is, to qualify for a home loan with just a 5% deposit. I think a lot of people are expecting this to really light a fire under the market. But then the federal government is coming out saying it's only, their modelling suggests it's only going to drive prices 0.5% higher over the next 6 years. So what's your take on this debate here? Is it going to really send prices soaring, or just in a particular sector of the market?
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be pretty interesting. Certainly, we think this is going to allow many to purchase sooner than they otherwise would have. So usually, a first home buyer would have to save at least 20% deposit to avoid lenders' mortgage insurance. And we know that deposit hurdle is really the most significant hurdle to home ownership. It's a substantial savings burden for many households. So an average income household would need to save for, it's pretty much close to 6 years at the moment to save a 20% deposit on a median priced home. And that hurdle's increased over the past year as home prices have risen around the country. And it's substantially higher than it was for previous generations. So it's an important reason why home ownership rates have been falling among younger households. Now, this bring forward of this home guarantee scheme, it's not income tested, it's not means tested. So that lower deposit burden will certainly help many to get into the housing market sooner. So that's very much good news if you're a first home buyer in today's market. So it's likely we will see an uplift in first home buyer activity. Now, I think that modelling that says that prices are going to increase 0.5% over 6 years is pretty conservative. It's probably underestimating the impact. So we're likely to have a lot more first home buyers competing for homes at a time when we know we have a lot of other buyers also competing for homes. So investor activity, owner-occupier activity, buyer demand is increasing as interest rates have moved lower this year. So it's likely we're going to have quite a few people or a lot of people competing for not many homes for sale. So we know that stock on market is also pretty constrained at the moment. And that usually does tend to mean one thing, that prices are going to lift. So really, although this is certainly good news for first home buyers in today's markets in terms of allowing many to purchase sooner than they otherwise would have, it is a scheme that unfortunately is likely to kind of shuffle that affordability problem forward in time. I guess more competition for first home buyers as well, despite that easier accessibility. So these kind of measures to ease affordability constraints, because that's why we're putting these types of schemes in place, only work sustainably if they're also accompanied by policies that increase supply at the same time. We know we already have a chronic shortage of homes in Australia. We've got constraints on the delivery of new housing, so we're simply not building enough to keep up with our population needs, and we haven't done for quite some time. So it's likely that this kind of demand side policy that's not linked to an increase in or a commensurate increase in supply is going to put further upward pressure on home prices.
Yeah, for sure. Now, just finally, Eleanor, we'll bring it back to Melbourne, if not for our listeners, but out of just sheer personal self-interest. But I think as, the country's second largest city, it kind of warrants a mention. In light of the home guarantee scheme, and, you mentioned supply there as well, with Victoria being the only real state to keep up with the Housing Australia Future Fund demands of building housing. Where do you see Melbourne in the next few years? Because as you mentioned earlier in the chat, that prices really haven't gone anywhere over the past sort of 5 to 6 years, despite all the COVID boom and whatever else. Where do you see Melbourne heading, especially in regards to, home prices taking off in lieu of supply picking up as well? Because I think the latest Proptrack data shows there's a kind of slight lift in prices in Melbourne, but it hasn't been like a huge bounce back or anything like that. So where do you see Melbourne heading?
Certainly, we are seeing that home price growth is reaccelerating in Melbourne after what has been fairly extended period of underperformance. So home prices in Melbourne are up just a little under 20% over the past 5 years. Compare that to some of those smaller capital city markets like Perth, Adelaide and Brisbane. Prices are up around 90% in each of those markets over the past 5 years. In Sydney, it's around 40%. So Melbourne's certainly been the laggard. We know that some of that was accumulated through the pandemic period for obvious reasons, or we don't need to go into that as to why we saw Melbourne's housing market underperforming then, but it's underperformed since then. However, we are now seeing that Melbourne home values are closing in on that 2022 price peak, so they're probably going to recover that price peak this month. And I do think that one of the reasons as to why we have seen, more of a stable home price environment in Melbourne has likely been, as you say, that supply picture. So we know that Victoria as a state has built more per capita than any other state over the past decade. And that likely is one of the reasons why we do see a more stable home price growth environment in Melbourne. However, at the moment, I think conditions in Melbourne are probably poised for home prices to take a bit of a leg higher. So Melbourne is actually one of our more affordable capital city markets now. Victoria is also the state forecast to have the strongest population growth out to 2030. So I'd say, and particularly when we put that kind of comparative affordability picture into play, I think looking at houses in Melbourne relative to houses in Sydney, they're the cheapest they've been relative to houses in Sydney for around 2 decades. So it is likely that we're going to see Melbourne, I think, playing a bit of a catch-up over the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, well, if Harrison gets to ask a couple of questions about Melbourne, then it's only fair I get to ask about my stomping ground, the Gold Coast. But I'll allow you to expand this out to just the regions in general. We saw regional areas really picking up in price, perhaps a bit more than capital city areas, kind of in the aftermath of COVID, with people moving out there now that they could work from home. But are we starting to see that trend reverse a bit, and as perhaps maybe more offices are requiring people to return to the office? What are you seeing there, Eleanor?
Certainly we're seeing that kind of value migration story that played out during COVID, pulling back to more average or pulling back from those very elevated levels that we saw throughout the pandemic period. But I think relative to kind of long run averages, we're still sitting above when it comes to that value migration story. I mean, it makes sense. We know that for some people, that hybrid work environments and remote work is still in play. And of course, with affordability constraints or affordability being such a significant challenge for many in today's market, a lot of people are becoming a little bit more flexible with where they buy or where they invest. And for many households, that does include the regions. Now, breaking it down, looking at that or those forward-looking indicators of demand based on those inquiry per listing metrics that we track, it does look like regional New South Wales and regional Victoria are kind of the hot spots for the spring selling season as to where demand is really increasing based on inquiry per listing at the moment.
Yeah, 2 very good self-serving answers to our questions, Eleanor, for us 2 boffins. But as always, yeah, great insights coming from yourself and Proptrack. Thanks so much for joining us on the Savings Tip Jar podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers, Eleanor. Thank you so much.